Thanks for joining in on another episode of An Inside Look. Our guest today is Lisa Curial, a child psychologist who works for the Edmonton Public School Board. She explores the unique aspects of child development, as well as shares her personal and professional growth as she became a mother herself. Parent or not, this discussion is guaranteed to be interesting.
Welcome back to another episode of An Inside Look. Today we have a special guest, Lisa Curial, who is a registered psychologist. We'll be sitting down today to share her story with us. How are you doing today, Lisa?
Good, thanks for having me.
Thank you. First off, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, as you said, my name is Lisa. I'm a registered psychologist in the province of Alberta, which means I have a master's degree in Master's of Education, and specializing in school psychology. My work is focused in the school-age population. So I work with kids, early education, all the way up to high school. Yeah.
Excellent. Have you always wanted to become a child psychologist?
Yes. I became interested in psychology when I was in undergrad. When I started my undergraduate degree in arts, I took a really interesting course in behavioral psychology, and it kind of just started from there. I had a great professor, and it took off, and I started taking every psychology course I could get my hands on. And but I knew I wanted to work with people, and that's where I sort of started to look into how I could learn more about the field.
So when you were going through school and going through these different psychology classes, what made you choose to go into child psychology rather than focusing on adults? For
sure, yeah. I was able to start doing some job shadowing when I was undergrad. So I was able to start shadowing a psychologist who worked with Edmonton Public, and I got to see what they do every day. And one of the things that a psychologist does who works with kids in school is what's called cognitive assessments, basically colloquially an IQ test. And I remember sitting there totally fascinated, so interested, and I thought, yeah, this is it. This is what I'm going to do at that point in time. And so I made that my focus.
Excellent. Sounds like you had just one moment, one spark that brought you there.
Yeah, it was so interesting. And the psychologist that I was with was passionate about their work. And I got to sit in classrooms, and he just taught me so much about the field. And I thought, yeah, that's it. This is it.
I think when people really passionate and they show there's a passion for the profession, they kind of put that onto others, and that passion does grow.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how did you end up, so now that you're obviously interested in doing, working with children, how did you end up in the position that you're in right now?
In the job the job that I have now? It's a bit of a long, lengthy road to becoming a registered psychologist. But obviously master's and defended a thesis, took a bunch of qualifying exams, did a practicum, and I got to start out actually in Calgary. It was my very first job, and it was an amazing opportunity, an amazing job. Nothing in school could prepare you for the work that I did there. But I moved down to Calgary with my husband, and I commuted everywhere south of southern Alberta every day to work with kids in small communities who didn't have as easy access to professionals as you might when you're living in a big city. And so we would go to them, and working with some of the most medically complex kids our province has, kids with autism spectrum disorder, behavioral challenges, but then also compounding cognitive challenges, maybe some vision and hearing impairments. So these kids have lots of differences, and got to work with them.
That's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
It must have been such a just an empowering experience to be able to make such a large difference in the lives of so many different children, especially when you're commuting such a far distance into a smaller community where they may not have access to these resources. what was one of the most memorable experiences, or I guess like times where you really felt like you made a huge difference in a patient's life when you were working down south?
I got to go to this very, very small town called Stavely, and it's just south of Calgary. At the time we went there, this town did not have a grocery store, did not have a coffee shop, like very small houses and a school attached to a library. And it was a small school. There was a grade 1-2 teacher, a grade 3-4 teacher, a grade 5-6. So they all taught 2 grades, and then a principal, and then some other staff. And I got to go down, and we always worked in multidisciplinary teams. So it would be myself and a speech pathologist and an occupational therapist, and we would go down and we got to work all day with kids, with teachers, with the principal, and they could say, these are our concerns, and we could respond with, okay, these are our ideas. And because it was a small school, we could really see the impact that we were having, and we got to go, all day. Sometimes it's okay, you have an hour, 2 hours with a child. It was all day, and it was just so impactful to see what we could do in this community, in this school, as a team.
That sounds amazing. I think that would be, especially as you're starting your career, I think that would be something that would really put you in a path of knowing that you're doing what you like and you're making a difference. So you mentioned that part of your job is not only talking to kids and assessing kids, but is also, I'm guessing, educating the teachers and the staff as well. Could you tell us a bit more about that part? How's that been?
Yeah, a big part of it too is sometimes it's teachers that initiate the referral to me saying, I have this concern, or it's parents and teachers saying, I have these concerns. And so I try to address them, and sometimes, yes, that includes assessment. But what an assessment provides is a deeper look into their concern, and then I can provide targeted strategies and recommendations based upon that. So if it's maybe there's some temper tantrums going on at school and at home, how can we figure that out? What are some strategies that we can implement at home and at school together? Maybe there's an academic concern. Maybe the child isn't learning to read as quickly as we would like. How can we start to implement supports and strategies so we can get this child reading?
That's very cool. Can you tell us a little bit more, or share some examples of what strategies you might recommend for let's say a teacher has sent you a referral, right, and has said a child isn't learning as quickly as some of the other children, or maybe they're just not behaving as well. Like what are some of the strategies that you would provide to these teachers or to these students?
For a learning concern, typically we would start off, we would gather more background information, of course, but typically if there's a significant learning concern, we would start out with what's called a cognitive assessment, your IQ test. And I think they get a bit of misrepresented. People think, oh, we're just going to get, a number, and then we're going to label you, your IQ is this number. And I always like to say, that's a part of it. But what we really get to do is see how this child learns and see how their brain works. And so after I do that assessment, I can say, hey, these are the ways that your child is going to learn best. So when we teach them, let's teach reading like this, or let's teach this in this way. So it gives us just a clear picture of how a child's brain works. And so then we can really start implementing really targeted strategies.
That sounds great. One of the questions, actually something that I thought of when you were mentioning that is, as you're doing these cognitive assessments, as you mentioned, sometimes you get bad rep because they think it's just a number and whatnot. My wife is a teacher, so I know that this is something that she's faced in her classroom. When a child gets this sort of assessment, and because it does have kind of a bad rep, do you find that you ever have struggle or pushback from parents where sometimes it's a little bit difficult to accept that your child may be struggling? How do you usually deal with that?
It's hard because sometimes that number that parents can be very focused on isn't what they hoped. And that's really hard. And what I try to do is focus on the positive, because every assessment you're going to see areas of strength and some areas of difficulty, and really focus on the strengths and how can we take what we know about this child and know their strengths, and how can we now tailor everything to play out those strengths. Because the emotion, the feeling behind how a child feels at school, their self-concept, is so impactful to their learning. So how can we make their learning the most positive experience by playing to their strengths? Maybe that child is really good with visual spatial reasoning, which is one area of assessment. So maybe they're really good with their hands, and they're really good at building things and constructing things. So instead of writing a paper about a topic, why can't we have them create a diorama or create a poster? That would be playing to their strengths.
Yeah. Which areas do you find that kids usually struggle in?
It really varies, and it depends on the child. I often will see difficulties with that, the verbal comprehension piece. Language, hearing language, speaking language, that is a foundational skill that we really need kids to be exposed to at a young age. Lots of language, and not language from the television and not language from the iPad. It's language, speaking, hearing, conversation. That is so important and so foundational. And unfortunately, I'm seeing more and more kids who really struggle with things like rhyming, with things like opposites, or how are these things the same? How is a pen and a pencil the same? Oh, you write with them both.
Yeah.
Those verbal problem solving.
So for kids that struggle with those things, and maybe for parents who find that their kids are struggling with those things, what would be some of the strategies you would recommend, or what are some of the things that we can do as a society or as parents or as the educational system to improve that?
You know, and that's been my area of interest now, because I have a 16-month-old, and my focus has really been with him is, okay, how can we lay this foundation so that he is the best prepared he can be once he starts into kindergarten. And what are the things that I really want to focus on? And language, hearing language, that is a major focus of mine. I have two. Language is one. And it can be as simple as we're at the grocery store and I say, hey, let's get some carrots. And, and just verbalizing what I'm doing. Okay, let's go find the milk. Those types of things. So, it can be so easily integrated. And I think, again, that's another misconception, is that we have to be doing these huge things and we have to be spending our time creating these things for our kids, and it's going to be a full-time job, and how can anyone meet that kind of standard, a parent who's so busy and working? And it doesn't have to be. It's just, verbalizing what you're doing, making language a part of your life. That's my one. And then my other one is I'm pretty crazy about literacy. And I did my master's thesis in reading disabilities. So early literacy, I'm passionate about. Again, exposure to books, having books around the house, going to the library. The library has so many great programs that are free. So just that early exposure to words is another big one, which ties in with that early exposure to language.
Absolutely. I think literacy is really, really important. Something that I hear from my wife's perspective, also as a teacher, she reiterates over and over again as well. But unfortunately, I hear that literacy is something that is becoming a problem in society, unfortunately. What do you think is contributing to that?
I can sometimes get on, be hard on tech. I can be, and I absolutely think tech has its time and its place and its importance. But I think it's become our go-to. And then kids aren't necessarily reading. And apps are great, and there are lots of reading apps out there, and there's so much, but nothing can replace a book. A good old-fashioned hold it in your hands book. Nothing can replace, you can see letters on an app, but nothing can replace wooden letters or magnet letters. Holding them in your hands, seeing things in 3D. So I think tech kind of gets in the way, and I think somehow we've almost lost that reading is part of our everyday life. It doesn't have to be an hour. You don't have to spend an hour reading with your child a day. 1 or 2 books, and little kids' books are short, is plenty.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you mentioned that, because as Dimitri was asking that question, that was the first thing that came to mind. And I thought of my niece who's 5 years old and she has an iPad, just playing with it all the time, right? What are different strategies that you recommend to parents to help them sort of balance that technology while trying to build up the child's literacy as well too?
It's hard, and and there's times where it's a strategy, you need it, you just have to use it. And I think making sure that there are limits and boundaries surrounding it. So I think one of the things that kind of gets me is seeing a TV on in the car when parents are driving around the city. Like, well, there's lots of toys, or your child could have a book, or there could be lots of other things, or you could be listening to an audiobook, another really awesome strategy in the car. So having it as time and place. Yes, we're allowed tech. You can watch your show on your iPad for half an hour. You need a break from school after a long day. Yes, but there's a boundary around it. And again, I see a lot of kids with sleep challenges. Not having that tech a couple hours before bed, putting it away, it's story time. So just making sure there's rules.
Yeah. I know that tech more and more is starting to be integrated into the educational system as well. And obviously there are a lot of negatives to it, but what are some of the ways that you find that tech is being used in positive ways in the education system?
It's a positive addition, absolutely. Because we live in a tech world, and what the education system is doing is teaching children how to use technology in the way that it's intended. Teaching them how to do an internet search or a Google search. Those are really important skills. Even typing, that's an important skill. So, integrating them into school systems, it's great. Tech is also being used as a form of reinforcement in schools, and it's powerful, especially with children who have, some behavioral challenges, things like that. Using an iPad, saying, "Hey, let's do some work," and then you get 5 minutes of iPad as a form of reinforcement. Again, a really powerful tool that we can be using with our kids, and using it as a break, as it's a time to just take a break at school. Again, I think it's teaching kids a lot of foundational skills that they need.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I thought about as well too, as just switching gears a little bit here, right? I find that a lot of the members of the public, a lot of our listeners, they don't really understand the difference between a registered psychologist and a psychiatrist. Can you share with us a little bit more about the differences and how your practice is different than a psychiatrist?
Sure. So a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. They went to medical school for 3 or 4 years, whatever program that they went to, and then did a residency in psychiatry. A psychologist is not a medical doctor. So a psychologist did an undergraduate degree, typically in psychology, and then did a master's in psychology or a related psychology field. In Alberta, we don't need a PhD to be a registered psychologist. In many other provinces in Canada, you do need a PhD.
Right.
So if you go to BC, a registered psychologist there would have a PhD.
Okay, gotcha.
So what are some of the ways that that you find that are differences just outside of the education system? So what are some of the differences between psychologists and psychiatrists, for example? If somebody's going to have an appointment with a psychologist, what are some of the expected results and how are they different versus then going to see a psychiatrist?
Psychologists and psychiatrists, especially in the education system, are quite complementary. And we have some fantastic psychiatrists in the city who can support, because we cannot prescribe medication. And so they can provide sort of that other piece. If we're seeing a child with ADHD or behavioral challenges, they can really provide that extra missing piece that we can't give. So with the psychiatrist appointment, I can't really speak to what their appointments look like. I'm really not all that sure. But if someone is going to see a psychologist like me, they would have my one-on-one time for a morning or an afternoon. And typically they would be seeing me to do a cognitive assessment, or I might be observing that child in class, seeing how things are going. Maybe I'm talking to the teacher, maybe I'm meeting with the parents. It can be varied, but it's just addressing the concerns that are at school.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. So I know that you said that sometimes what your day-to-day may look like, it's actually being, sort of in the classroom environment, observing the child. I think that's I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a child, and being surrounded by my other classmates. How does that feel for, like, I guess, how do you communicate to the child to let them know that, hey, it's okay, like, I'm just gonna be watching you and observing you? Like, what is the messaging behind that?
So when I go into a classroom and I have a specific child that has been identified as a referral, I don't typically tell them that I'm there for them. And then that way they just think that I'm just a nice little visitor. And if it's little kids, then they're all very excited that a visitor is in their classroom, and I just try to be a fly on the wall so I don't make the child uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's kind of how we go about it the best.
Very cool.
Yeah.
How do the children respond generally when you start having maybe closer one-to-one conversations with them?
Then I typically would pull the child out of the classroom and work with them one-on-one. And I think it depends on the age. Some, and the way I phrase it is, oh, hey, we're going to do some really fun work together. And the nature of cognitive assessments too is they actually start off kind of fun. There's things to do and things to see. So they're, little kids especially are typically typically pretty excited to be able to go do special work with someone. And junior high, maybe not so much. And they're more worried about their, how they look to their friends, and high school can be tougher like that too. But yeah.
Do you ever face some resistance from the children?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had kids flat out refuse to do that and not want to do it, and they end up doing it. I've never had a child I haven't been able to successfully complete an assessment yet. So, but sometimes it can just take a little bit more persuasion, more work.
I can imagine in this line of work, as you see different children struggle with various things, it can be really rewarding being able to help them. But I can imagine that it probably takes a bit of a toll as well of seeing some things and make it a little more difficult for you. Do you ever find the job to be challenging?
Absolutely. The job can be challenging, definitely depending on where in Edmonton you're working. Can be challenging sometimes to have the parents engaged, and because some parents have their own mental health challenges and are really just working hard to provide the basics for kids. So to ask them of something else that we're doing, it may not be in their current ability to do that, and that can be hard. But we try to work with what we have, and schools are always very supportive, and that's my focus, is how can we make this 6 or 7 hours a day that this child has the best it can be.
Absolutely, yeah. And sort of on that note, what are some different strategies you use for managing stress in your own personal life?
That's a work in progress. I'm always trying to figure out ways to manage, but I make sure I get to the gym. I think making sure that my mental health is taken care of in terms of I feel like I've gotten an hour for me, and that's at the gym. I find that as long as I've had that 1 hour for myself, then I can do everything else for everybody else for the rest of the day, and I'm okay.
I know it's something that you've kind of more on a personal note. I know you've alluded to the fact that it's kind of changed your perspective a little bit since you had a child of your own. How do you find that since you had your child that it changed your perspective as a psychologist, as well as maybe even your own practice?
Well, I think since I've had my son, it's been this reevaluation of what I want to do, how I want to practice, how I want to try to support kids, and it's changed my view on how to expose my son to learning, and my focus has been through play. And I really think that if we can give our kids any opportunity as a young age, it is just to play, to explore, and to just give them. I mean, we all have seen the fancy toys and then a cardboard box put down next to the child, and what does that child typically gravitate to? The cardboard box, right? So just giving my shift, I guess, has been to just, kids are a blank slate. Just give them basic things, and they will blow your mind. They will surprise you.
Yeah, I can't even begin to imagine. Now, I think that a lot of times when
we are, as healthcare professionals, you know, there's a notion of empathy, right? Deploying empathy towards our patients. And a lot of times it's very difficult because we may not necessarily have been in those shoes before.
Yeah.
Now, how has, you know, having your son impacted that aspect of your practice?
Yeah. And that's something I think about a lot because I haven't gone back full-time to my previous job just yet. And I think a lot about how, when I talk to parents, how that might shift now that I've had a child. And you develop, I think, more sensitivity to the things that I'm telling parents about, those difficult issues. And I hope I was sensitive before, but I think now there'll be more emotion to it because I can attempt to relate, having my own child. There's obviously many parents that I can't relate to and who have struggled with homelessness or, you know, being able to put food on the table. Those types of issues I can't relate to, but I just try to be as empathic as possible and gentle, I think.
Yeah. Kind of just puts you a little bit more into their shoes.
Yes, as a parent. And I think I think that will be, at least from my understanding, when I've seen other psychologists who are parents, it is a benefit. Yeah.
Are you worried about having your child get out there as he goes to kindergarten, as he goes to school?
Totally. Yes, totally. It is a worry for parents because in the end, you know, you think your child is amazing and they're just in a group of kids, and it's hard out there for little kids. So yeah, I do worry just being able to make friends or to,
And then just like you mentioned, you just want to make sure to equip them with all the right tools so they can face all the challenges and be able to overcome them.
Yes, and you know, I really feel that kindergarten, the demands on kids for the knowledge they should have before they enter kindergarten has gotten to be huge.
Okay.
Like huge. You know, before kids in kindergarten now, it's expected that they know their alphabet and they should know how to print their name and these skills that maybe we didn't expect until grade 1 are now demanded of a 5-year-old. And that really puts a lot on parents. Not every parent has access to preschool. It's expensive. And so that learning then falls on the parent. Well, what if the parent is working full time? And so how do you start to put your child on an even playing field when Johnny over there can spell and write the whole alphabet and do all these things? And so I think the demands, there's a lot of demand on parents. And I think that kindergarten and grade 1, really the focus should still be play and developing social skills and those types of things as opposed to rigorous academics.
So do you think that these sort of potentially unrealistic expectations for everyone could create some sort of these issues that may arise later on? In terms of children falling behind and things like that?
For sure, children falling behind, but also I worry about the emotional state of a child when they enter kindergarten and realize that the child sitting next to them can do all of these things, can do addition, and I can't. And maybe they don't realize that in kindergarten, but in grade 1, if they're consistently having a tough time keeping up to their peers, how does that reflect on their self-concept? All of a sudden the child might say, well, I don't want to go to school. And that would be terrible to hear that in grade 1 because you know that school is a pretty long haul from grade 1. So yeah, I really worry about how that child's going to feel about themselves.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think you're totally right. I think that especially in this day and age, and especially at such a young age as well, too, you know, kids are very used to comparing themselves to others, right? They compare their skill sets to other people, and you know, this perceived intellectual status, or you know, what other kids may have, and I think a lot about, I try to put myself in their shoes, and I can't even begin to imagine. What are some different ways you would recommend that parents can, you know, sort of help build up that self-esteem and encourage them to sort of grow organically?
Yeah. I think one of the things, if you're finding a child is really struggling
Mm-hmm.
at school and finding themselves not succeeding like their peers, that takes a conversation with the teacher to say, hey, how can we make this child feel more successful at school?
Mm-hmm.
Is it giving them a job?
Mhm.
Little kids love jobs,
Yeah.
to be this teacher's helper or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or is it, you know, I've had teachers even say, okay, well, I created a math worksheet that looks identical to everybody else's,
Mm-hmm.
but it's 3 grade levels lower.
Mm-hmm.
And so that nobody knows that that child is doing something that's quite a bit easier and looks the same. And maybe that child doesn't even know either.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing things like that, how can we make this child do little things to make this child feel more successful, more positive about themselves?
Mm-hmm.
And I think as parents, we can model, oh, hey, mommy, you know, didn't do a good job of this, or this is when I failed, or you don't have to say failed, but this is when I made a mistake, and this is how I learned from it, and this is how I try again, and really modeling for our kids how we manage these situations, because we have them,
Yeah.
and there's, you know, talking them out, explaining how you deal with it, and modeling it for your child is a powerful teaching tool.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think we can essentially modeling by example is what you're saying.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it is pretty important. I think a lot of people don't consider that just showing that you've always had it great to your child or you're never impacted by anything may not be the right way of handling things as well.
Absolutely not. No, I agree with that, in that if we always shield our child from every emotion, when they do have those emotions that inevitably will happen,
Mm-hmm.
my concern would be then, well, do they think that they're the only one having those emotions, therefore is something wrong with them?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to expose to them the bigger, the entire situation if it's not developmentally appropriate.
Mhm.
But it's discussed, thinking about what you'd like Mike to share with your child, what's developmentally appropriate, and then speaking to them about it on their level.
Yeah. You know,
Alluding to that shielding that you mentioned that parents can do, I think everybody has heard sort of that term of helicopter parents and whatnot. What role do you think that plays of having the parents actually protect their child from seeing some of the bad things that are occurring at school, bad things that are occurring in the world? How important do you think that is, and what is the balance that's needed?
That's a really hard question. Yeah, and I think for little kids, the things that, you know, if we want to talk about some of the current events that are going on, I think little, you know, 6-year-olds don't really need to be known the breadth of that. But I think, you know, as a parent, you can use your discretion as to what you think your child can and can't handle. And not shielding them from everything, but saying maybe something bad happened in the world today, and keeping it, you know, not you don't have to go into great detail, but letting them know that things do happen.
Yeah. One thing that I'm kind of curious about is, you know, say that if I'm a parent, right, and, you know, I've identified that my child is struggling, right, what is the, I guess, like, I know that backtracking a little bit, earlier in the interview, we talked about how teachers can make referrals to a registered psychologist. What, what does that look like for a parent? Like, what sort of process would they go through?
Sure. So the parent can always advocate for their child by going to the school and saying, hey, these are my concerns. Could we, you know, try to get my child an assessment? And the school would then hopefully follow up with that. Another route parents can take is paying for an assessment privately. That, you know, that it can be expensive, but a parent can always go that route and go see a psychologist to do an assessment for the child and pay for it out of pocket, versus the school system, which would be able to maybe be able to provide that for you. So there are a couple of different routes if you're concerned.
Yeah.
Do you think the system adequately provides enough support for children that are struggling right now, as well as for parents?
Yeah, absolutely. Our school system, and I can only speak for Edmonton Public, that's where it does a fantastic job with what we have. There's a lot of need in Edmonton, and the amount of referrals we get are significant, and I can tell you without a doubt that every single professional within Edmonton Public, teachers, everybody within Edmonton Public is working the hardest they can to support students in every way that they can.
Very cool. So within Edmonton, I guess, like, for all schools that are part of the Edmonton Public School system, are all of them eligible to make these referrals to a registered psychologist?
Yeah, so we have a large group of registered psychologists that work for Edmonton Public, and if there's a concern, the school would make a referral, not to me. They have a contact who is above me who takes in all those referrals, reviews them, and then gives them to me or to another psychologist. So yeah, every school in Edmonton Public, again, I can't speak for the Catholic system, would have the opportunity to refer a child.
And if a child is identified to be struggling in certain areas after an assessment, what sort of supports does the system have in order to make sure that the child gets the help that they need and the assistance? Yeah,
I mean, what Edmonton Public offers is absolutely phenomenal for programming and supports. As the psychologist, I always provide what we call recommendations at the end of a report. So every assessment that I do, I write a report. And the report is basically a document summarizing everything in quite a lot of detail. Reports tend to be pretty lengthy documents. And at the end of that report, I provide strategies and recommendations for learning. But then Edmonton Public also offers programming based upon the concerns. So, you know, the teachers are wonderful at implementing strategies, whether I recommend them or they know them on their own because they're teachers and know so much about child learning. So yeah, there's a lot of programming available for kids.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah, and sort of on a very similar note, say that you have conducted an assessment, and you know, as we know it, treatment often or sometimes consists of non-drug measures, and sometimes there are therapeutic measures that we need to use. What does the process look like if you've identified that a child does need some medications to help support them? What does that look like in terms of referral to a psychiatrist or referral to their family physician or what have you?
That's a tricky one because my scope of practice, I try not to talk. I don't talk about medication because it's really not within my knowledge base. But what I always say to parents is, take this report. I always give an extra copy. Take this report to your pediatrician, family doctor, psychiatrist, whatever it is, and show it to them. Talk about it with them. Show them the diagnosis, and they can also provide additional information that might be supportive to your family. And sometimes parents will ask me about medication and say, "What do I do?" And I say, it's an option. So please go to your doctor and you can talk about it further.
And then just sort of a curiosity question, because I think a lot of people may not know exactly where the line lies, but can psychologists diagnose somebody with, let's say, ADHD specifically?
Yes. Yeah. So that's anything in the DSM that a psychologist can diagnose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's very cool. Sort of switching gears a little bit, I know that one thing that a lot of parents struggle with is, balancing work and balancing, being a parent, balancing, all the things that life has to offer. How has that been for you ever since you've had your son, and what does that look? How has that shaped your life?
It's hard. It's hard to balance everything, to try to get everything done in a day, and I think you just need to prioritize and know that you're going to have to let go of some things and that not everything is going to get done, and try and just accept and just say this is what's happening and accept that. But it's a hard balance, and sometimes you feel rushed thinking, okay, I got to get all this work done during his nap time, and you feel rushed. And I think it's an ongoing, evolving, shifting, changing balance for me, because I think kids are always shifting and changing, and so what works last week might not work this week. So it's just being able to be flexible.
And as your son gets older and as he goes to school and preschool and kindergarten,
what are your personal professional goals? Are you planning to go back to your old job? Or are you looking to do something else?
Yeah, so I mean, I plan to go back to Edmonton Public. I am off for a little bit longer, and then I'm also looking at a few different things. There's some great new center called Pine opening up in Edmonton, and so I'm hoping to do some work with them. I started an Instagram page, which has been another way to just another creative outlet for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I've started developing some workshops for parents. I have one coming up on childhood anxiety and temper tantrums. So that's been interesting too, to try to provide more resources for parents. And I just think there's so much out there to be learned and to be explored that I just want to try and take all the opportunities.
I think that's fantastic. Especially the workshops. Sound like a great idea. I think there are so many parents out there that just don't know which direction to take or what to do. How do you find has been the response to these workshops?
I'm just getting going. I haven't even delivered my first one yet, but the response has been positive, and I've got some people kind of enrolled and ready to go. It's coming up in April, and so yeah, I think there's so many parenting books out there, and there's so much information, and it's so, even for me, it's so overwhelming to go to Chapters or to look on Amazon for a book, a parenting book, and then try to find a good one. It's too much, right? So to have someone in a couple of hours be able to give you some direction and some strategies in a few hours, I hope simplifies the process for parents.
Yeah, absolutely. So where can people find out more about these workshops, and where can people find you on, I know you mentioned Instagram, you're starting to share a little bit more practical tools that parents can use. Where can people find you to learn a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so my Instagram is YEG Child Psychologist. The workshops that we'll be doing are through Pine. So Pine is on Instagram as well. And so you can definitely find more details on there. They haven't quite opened up yet, but it's coming, and we're hoping to start that up in the coming months. And yeah, those are my two main.
And what is Pine about? So tell us just a little bit more about Pine.
Yeah, so I'm still pretty new into being introduced to Pine, but it's a multidisciplinary, family-focused health center. So it's run by a physiotherapist and a psychologist, not myself. And they are, basically we want it to be a place for families, primarily women pre and postnatal, parents, kids to be able to go to access support that they need. So there'll be massage therapy and fitness classes and yoga and dietitian. So there's a wealth of supports that parents can access for their families.
Very cool.
That's really awesome.
And just to wrap things up here, what is one thing that you really want to share with parents? One thing that you really want the public to know that they may not at this point in time.
Parents to know about the field.
About your practice, or or I guess like one lesson that you really want them to take away.
Okay. Yeah. I think one thing about my practice that a lot of people don't know is that all psychologists are therapists and counselors, and that we're going to sit down for a one-on-one talk therapy session. I don't do any of that in my practice, and I would never. It's definitely not my area of strength. But that psychologists have a wealth of knowledge in many different areas, and so by talking to one, you can expect a bunch of different areas of expertise.
Thank you very much again. We really appreciate your time and really enjoy this interview.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hey guys, thanks for joining in on another episode of An Inside Look. Today, we had the chance to interview Lisa, who's a child psychologist and a mother, and she shares with us 3 valuable lessons she's been able to acquire through her experience. So number 1 is self-care. She talks about how it's really important to take that hour outside of your day just to focus on yourself, because ultimately you can't take care of others when you haven't been able to take care of yourself. Number 2 is learning. She talks about how learning should not be, this cookie cutter approach where we just apply the same principles for all of the children, but rather they should be individualized to each child's needs. And number 3 is creating a supportive environment. It's important to create that environment where the child can learn and grow, and that involves, letting them be able to be creative and play. That's it, guys. Hope you really enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe, hit that like button, and comment below, what are some of the valuable insights that you've been able to acquire. And that's it. Until next time.